Welcome to the France 24 debate. The news of a vaccine that is 90% effective against COVID-19 has sparked widespread hope across the world. This historical news breaking on November the 9th in New York, where Pfizer, the drug giant, is based. The vaccine has been found in partnership with a German company, BioNTech. Tonight, we're going to examine the claims, and our panel will be, crossing their fingers at the same time, of course, hoping this is the beginning of the end of the pandemic. We'll hear from our guests after this report from Solange Mougin here at France 24.
The good news, it's thought to be effective more than 90% of the time. Pfizer and BioNTech announced Monday their vaccine is showing breakthrough promise. But there are some major logistical challenges ahead. Regulators haven't approved it yet. The vaccine requires 2 jabs 3 weeks apart, and the vials need to be kept at exceedingly cold temperatures, or below -70 degrees Celsius, which means hospitals will likely have to administer it.
The public will have to come to the vaccine. We can't bring the vaccine to the public because you can't lug that -70-degree freezer around with you, or other things that keep the vaccine really cold. So that will complicate the delivery.
Key safety questions have yet to be answered too, such as how long it provides immunity and if it works just as well on populations that need it most, like the elderly or pregnant women. The European Union had already pre-ordered 200 million doses and the US 100 million of this vaccine. But these first orders won't be enough, so initially medical staff will likely be vaccinated first.
Healthcare workers will be prioritized when the vaccine is in limited quantities. It makes sense because healthcare workers are the front line of defense, and we want to make sure they're protected. And they're also going to be recommending the vaccines.
Pfizer says it plans to produce up to 50 million doses globally this year and 1.3 billion doses next year. Not nearly enough to cover everyone, but other vaccines remain in the works. Nearly a dozen other trials are also at stage 3. And scientists say that collectively that means there's light at the end of this pandemic tunnel.
These are indeed exciting times. Solange Mougin with that report. And of course, as we're talking, cases are increasing. People are still losing their lives because of COVID-19. Now, let's just confirm something for you. The EU Commission is to sign a contract with Pfizer and BioNTech soon for up to 300 million doses. This from the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, speaking as ever via social media. Our guest for the first half of this debate on the COVID vaccine, joining us from Lancaster, northwest England, a place I know extremely well, Dr. Mohammed Munir, virologist and lecturer in biomedicine at the University of Lancaster. Thank you, sir, for being with us. And in Paris, Pauline Londex, who's co-founder of the Observatoire de la Transparence des Médicaments, or, I'll put it into English, the Drug Transparency Observatory. Pauline, thank you for joining us too. Clearly, I think we all agree that this is great news, that there could be a vaccine soon. But I suspect that my guests have some reservations. Pauline, I will bring you in first to tell us what you think and what you fear.
So, of course, we are very happy to see any good news in these very dark moments, in these very dark times on the pandemic. But of course, as you said, and as it was said during the report of the reporter of France 24, there are things that we don't know about these vaccines yet. For now, we only have the communication of Pfizer, and unfortunately, we can't only rely on this communication of Pfizer. We need more information, more data. We need it to be reviewed by an independent review committee and also by the regulators to be able to know what's behind this 90% efficacy. I think it's very important to know what's behind it, which means what is the research question that is asked in the research protocol of Pfizer in this trial, and what is this answer of 19%? What does it cover? Does it reduce the severe form of the disease, or does it prevent people to pass on the disease? I think this is very important to know if this candidate will be able to answer to the problem of controlling the transmission at the populational level of this disease. This is the only way to reduce the transmission that we will have. That's the most important way that we will have to reduce the pandemic and to fight the pandemic.
Indeed, over 1.8 million people in France have COVID-19 or have had COVID-19. Over 42,000 people have lost their lives, and these figures continue to climb. I think we all agree that we want this vaccine to work, or a vaccine to work, whoever finds it, but clearly we need to make sure it's the right thing at the right time and it's going to the right place. We heard about the logistical issues in our report. Let's bring in Dr. Munir from Lancaster in northwestern England. Dr. Munir, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time. Pauline expressing her misgivings, her fears. What do you think?
Well, I think there are certainly some scientific, logistic, or technical issues with the vaccine deployment. But I think this is really the first results that we can count that as a proof of principle concept, because all what the data we have had before on any kind of vaccine, those been under controlled environment, on animal studies, on T-cell antibody responses. But these are the first clues that we will certainly have a vaccine, either this one or any other one, as a proof of principle concept. I think this is certainly a watershed moment.
In terms of what has to happen next, Dr. Munir, I imagine that you agree with Pauline that basically all the right tests need to happen, or all the right steps need to be gone through.
Yes, absolutely. I think there is no compromise on to that. Primarily for those vaccines, those are not based on the proven technologies. For example, the Pfizer, Moderna vaccines, those are based on the technology that has not been into the human veins on that scale before. So certainly there is no any corner that need to be cut, particularly at this point, because what we are looking into a very short time deployment of vaccine in a large population. Because that is the demand and unprecedented need. But for example, if we look onto the perspective of previous diseases like respiratory syncytial virus, we did have vaccines that are not really proven technologies, but we didn't need to deploy on that scale. But this time, whatever the vaccine would become available, that would be deployed on a large scale. And if it is not rigorously tested and proven and accepted with the scientific and the regulatory bodies, I think that's going to pose not only challenges for the health perspective, but also moving forward on the reliability and the credibility of the vaccines.
Indeed, so many challenges ahead. Dr. Munir, for now, thank you very much indeed. Pauline, I'll come back to you. Pauline Londex is from the Drug Transparency Observatory based here in Paris. Pauline, you and I have spoken about this before, and I think one of your concerns was who would get the vaccine, how readily it would be available, and how it would be democratically shared out, if you like. A fear perhaps that given that Pfizer is based in the US and Donald Trump, who is still the president until January the 20th, has promised that everyone will get their shot of the vaccine. Are you concerned that what might happen next, that maybe there might be less available for parts of the world that perhaps need it more?
So I completely agree with your question and your fears, but I think there are things that we need to really say here to remember is that this vaccine, even if it's Pfizer that's behind it, it's also BioNTech that's behind it. And as you said earlier, as was said, 300 million doses were bought by the European Commission, and also 375 million euros were funded by the German government for this trial, and also 100 million was invested by the bank, the European Investment Bank, on this trial. So on one hand, it's a US vaccine, but on the other hand, it's also a European publicly funded vaccine. So I think it's important to remember that. And there is another point you ask about the availability. Of course, it's a major concern, because now we know what Pfizer will be able to provide in terms of number of doses of this vaccine, and we can see that it will maybe cover the northern countries, but maybe not entirely. And what about the global south countries? And what my fear here is that once again, the global south countries will be the least ones to access innovation. And we have heard a lot, the President Macron and other politicians talking about this COVID vaccine should be global goods and accessible for everyone. But if there is not the capacity of production for this vaccine, then in the end, what will happen is that we can fear that the population in the least developed countries, the middle-income countries, will be the least ones to have access to the innovation. So once again, that's, I think, a very important ethical concern that we can have and that I wanted to highlight here.
Pauline, I'm going to come straight back to you. Obviously, you just said, you talked there, I think, about sort of sufficiency in vaccine. President Macron has launched, of course, a campaign to create a place where vaccines can be created here in France to provide them for the French nation. We've had a tweet through. You can obviously join in the conversation watching from wherever you are via the hashtag F24debate. This is our first tweet. This isn't going to work in France with this very strange vaccination system where you fetch your vaccine from the pharmacy yourself and take it to the doctors. Pauline, what are your thoughts on that? Is the way that vaccines are handed out in France complicated? I think we've already heard from our report that the nature of this new vaccine is that it needs to be stored at such a cold temperature that people will have to go to it rather than people taking it from the pharmacy to the doctor and handling it that way. That would probably kill the vaccine, wouldn't it? So, Pauline, the way we do vaccines in France is a problem?
I'm not sure if it will be a major problem in France, but clearly a vaccine that has to be kept at minus 70 degrees Celsius is clearly something that will not work in most of the planet. So that's something very worrying, and that's once again why we think that we have to look a little bit back in the development of these tools that we need. And we need tools against this pandemic, including vaccines, that will answer to the needs and to the population. It's clearly a need that we have to have a vaccine that's also easier to take, easier to provide to people. And a vaccine that has to be kept at minus 75%, minus 75 degrees, is something that will not be able, that will not reach most of the people in the world.
Indeed, that great French phrase, c'est compliqué, is coming to mind. Pauline, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Dr. Munir, who's waiting for us in Lancaster. Mohammed Munir, who's a virologist at Lancaster University. The situation, as Pauline's described it, it's complicated getting the vaccine where it needs to be. If indeed this proves to be the one, it could be a logistical nightmare.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the major challenges, as we've been talking before, is really the transportation, because it required ultra cold chain, not only just for the storage purposes, but also start from the production lines, from exit from the factory until it touched the arm. It required cold storage, and that is not just a cold storage, it is 80 Celsius below 0 Celsius, which is really high demand and a very high undertaking, because most of the GPs or small hospitals, all they have freezer which can take up to minus 20 Celsius, but this is even further than that. And of course, we can try to tackle this problem with the provision of the dry ice or the liquid nitrogen, but the dry ice and liquid nitrogen are already in shortage. So therefore, that is one of the major challenges. And this is, for example, particularly talking about the Pfizer vaccine, this is based on a messenger RNA, mRNA-based vaccine, and it's very fragile. And really, what the maximum you can do, you can take out from minus 80 only 4 times. So this means if it is 5th time, the mRNA will fall apart and wouldn't be effective. So that is one, of course, on a logistic reasons that this is really an ideal vaccine. But certainly, as I said before, my cautious optimism is that this is a proof of principle concept, and we have other vaccines, those are running in parallel. Hopefully, those will have relatively less logistic challenges, and we will have some good news at the end of this year.
Researchers testing 52 vaccines in clinical trials on humans, at least 87 preclinical vaccines are under active investigation in animals. Whether you agree with experimenting on animals or not, that's another issue. But I'm just telling people the facts as they are going on. Dr. Munir, thank you very much indeed. Let me bring Pauline Londex back in for what will possibly be the last question and answer before the end of this part of the debate. Pauline, the doctor that we heard in our report, Dr. Schnaffer from Vanderbilt Hospital, was talking about the public who will have to come to the vaccine, basically implying that thousands, millions of people have to pass by a hospital to have this vaccine injected into their bodies. And one can see that this could create a situation where these places become actual places where people catch the vaccine, catch the disease rather than get cured of it.
Well, this is for all the reasons that you explained just now. Of course, it will have to be very well organized. The logistic will have to be very well organized, and we have to remember that people will have to go twice to the hospitals for one vial and for the other one. So it can be indeed very complicated to organize logistically. But let's hope that our public health authorities will be able to organize this.
Let's hope indeed. Let's just leave you with, well, a little bit of humour about this issue before we sign off at the end of part one. A cartoon in one of the national newspapers in the UK today. Let's see if we can put it onto our wall so everyone can appreciate it. The cartoonist Matt, who is published in the Daily Telegraph. His cartoon, I think you can see it there. I can't read it because no one's given me a chance to look at it properly. There it is. I must have the Pfizer vaccine. It's not for me, it's for my mink coat. And clearly we've heard about the disease transferring from animals to humans and back to animals in that way. We'll get more discussion on this in part two. We're discussing the vaccine from Pfizer for Covid-19. Is it the real one? Is it going to happen? How soon can it happen? What has to happen to make sure we're all safe? Stay with us. Part two of the France 24 debate. We're examining the claims of a vaccine. Our guests have been sharing their concerns as well as their hopes. We're also joined for part two by another guest in Denver, Colorado, Jennifer Reich, Professor of Sociology at the University of Denver, Colorado. A very good evening to you, and we'll join you in a few moments' time. The Pfizer vaccine's been developed in conjunction, of course, with a German company called BioNTech. The two people behind this name have an interesting story. Our Berlin correspondent Nick Spicer is standing by to start this second part of our debate with more on these brilliant but somewhat self-effacing people. Nick, good evening to you. What is the story then about this husband and wife team who found the vaccine?
Well, they're interesting for a number of reasons. I'm just going to show you their faces, and these smiling faces have been plastered across the German newspapers and television the past few days. The man's name is Uhur Shaheen, and she is Özlem Tureji, a man and wife, a married couple, put this all together. And they have basically surprised the world with this discovery. Serious scientists. They actually, on the very day of their wedding, went into the laboratory, just to give you an idea of what kind of people they are. He was born in Turkey, moved here into Germany at the age of 4. His parents worked at the Ford factory. He studied to become a doctor. And then she came, actually was born in Germany to a physician, and studied to be a doctor, and they began working together. It was 2 years ago that Uhur Shaheen shocked people, or surprised them, let's say, to a certain extent here in Berlin at an immunology conference. He was working with RNA, ribonucleic acid, as a way of fighting cancer, immunotherapies. And he said, you know, by the way, this could be good to fight viruses and a pandemic. Now, when the pandemic broke, he told all of his 1,900 employees that they could not go on vacation. He called it Operation Lightspeed. Everybody had to work as hard as they could. He said it wasn't a matter of opportunity, but a matter of responsibility. And as you were saying, they're a self-effacing couple. When they got the good news over the weekend that this vaccine had a 90% efficacy rate, which, as you were saying, is extremely high, they celebrated by having a little Turkish tea in the same apartment they've been living in for years. And they continue to take their bicycles to work. So very modest lifestyle for these people who are now billionaires many times over.
Indeed, they sound like remarkable people on every level. Nick, Germany, it's fair to say, has faced integration challenges with its Turkish immigrant population in the past. So what is the sort of political backdrop to all this?
Well, I'll tell you, one party that has really nothing to say at all is the far-right anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany. I've been going through their Twitter feed, and unless I've missed something, they really haven't had any comments of any kind. They've been very critical of the government's COVID response strategy. However, other politicians have been pointing out to the couple. One from the Free Democratic Party, Johannes Vogel, saying, look, this is a shining example of successful immigration. If we didn't have Uhur Shaheen and Özlem Tureji at the head of this company, we would not have the vaccine. Equally, the conservative business magazine Focus praised their efforts, saying if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be getting to where they go. So there's this kind of, if you will, feel-good message, because the Turkish community, which began moving here in 1955 up until 1973 as guest workers and then stayed on, had families, were poorly integrated, have often felt not really accepted by Germany for a number of reasons, including the way they accord citizenship. But I think this is something that really, I talk to people in the neighborhood. There's a lot of people in my neighborhood who are of Turkish descent, and they're feeling pretty proud. One other element of political, not quite reconciliation, but feel-good news, if you will, the head of Pfizer happens to be a Greek man by the name of Albert Boula. Now, Greece and Turkey, of course, don't have very good diplomatic relations. That is of no consequence to the two men who are working together to get this vaccine out there. And they basically are big fans of each other. And so two feel-good stories, if you will, behind the vaccine.
Indeed, lots of reasons to be cheerful in this one, Nick, aren't there? So this vaccine discovered in Germany, does this mean that Germans are going to get it first?
I have another headline for you. Not quite well, it's just chocolate full. Yeah, pretty much. I think the light's perhaps too bright. We're going to have 400,000 people here in Berlin. I don't know how much you can see. I'll just give you the numbers. Forgive me for reading a little bit. 400,000 cases in about 3 million people in the initial stage. So we're going to open 6 centers. You were talking earlier about how are you going to deliver this vaccine. It sounds like they're going to be setting up those army tents that we saw during the COVID crisis, some kind of center that people can come to. And they have the former head of the fire department here in Berlin taking charge of that mission. So somebody used to dealing with emergency situations. I'm assuming it's going to be set up in some kind of, camp, army tent style situation. Lots of questions though. Where do you put them? What are the opening hours? What kind of parking will there be? What do you do about the old people who are in homes and need to have, the stuff brought to them? They can't readily displace themselves. And what do you do about getting the second dose 3 weeks later and make sure that people come in? So lots of questions, but it's very early days. And the overall feeling here is one that of pride. I think that a German company really did the heavy lifting on the research, and that Germany is going to be able to inoculate its citizens in very short order, it would seem.
And as you say, Nick, the added bonus in terms of the reasons to smile because of this story, because two children of immigrants actually being behind this and making it all happen, and giving the light to those people who say that immigrants don't contribute to society. We know, of course, that is not the case, and it has never been the case. Nick Spicer, stay with us, please, for more on the German aspect of this one, the firm based in central Germany. I believe Nick will clarify on that one. Nick outlining a lot of the problems in terms of the logistics of providing this vaccine to those who need it. Let's go to Mohammed Munir for more on that issue, that situation, and what all this could mean. Mohammed, you were saying earlier about the difficulty of getting this to people in the way it needs to arrive, in the way it has to be there. What we've heard from Nick there is that clearly, this could be a military operation. Do you think that is the right approach?
Well, certainly, I think one of the major issues, as I think we all understand, is that this need to be deployed. Any vaccine that would be registered need to be deployed in a very short time, particularly for the vulnerable communities. And that cannot be administered through existing routes or existing infrastructure that have been put in place. So any vaccine that would be registered would have its own challenges. And according to the technology that would have been applied within the vaccine, the infrastructure need to be built around and need to be deployed in a very, very quick order so that we can protect the vulnerable communities. And that required of course, the introduction of the forces or pre-preparation. For example, here in the UK, as you probably know, is already starting building the infrastructure to deploy the vaccine into the field. So certainly there would be a lot of challenges, and the effort would be accordingly. And I'm pretty certain that all the governments, they are motivational, and we're very high up into the morale to really deploy that in no time.
Indeed. I heard earlier that there's talk of vaccination beginning in the UK in December. I don't know whether that is just, as we say, paper talk, or whether that is something that could happen. What do you think?
Well, I think it would be a big challenge actually to do deployment at that scale within a month time, because I think we are at just early stages of preparation at the GP level. However, the other thing that is a bitter reality is that we don't yet have the vaccine that is already approved. And there are, of course, certainly very high hopes, but yet there are a few hurdles that need to be crossed before we will be reaching to the stage where either it is an emergency approval or approval at a full scale. And that would be the time that we really need to look very critically onto the deployment.
Indeed. Dr. Munir, stay with us, please. We'll come back to you very, very shortly. Let's bring in our next guest, Jennifer Reich, who is a professor of sociology at the University of Denver in Colorado. Thank you very much for being with us. There are many issues regarding this pandemic and the effect it has had on people. Whilst one can expect people to feel perhaps optimistic at the news that there is a vaccine which is said to be 90% efficient, there are obviously other issues that will maybe sort of leave people right now feeling pretty down, I imagine.
So one of the things we have to know as consumers is this vaccine not just effective, but also safe? And we've gotten very little information so far about the safety profile. The preliminary data look promising as they've been announced by Pfizer, but we are all waiting for more information. So we want to know, what are the side effects of after immunization? There's some indication that after the second dose, a sizable number of people experienced serious discomfort, like fevers, aches. I think I read one article that likened it to being hungover for the entire next day. And those side effects might be totally acceptable if the efficacy is good and we feel like it's worth the risks, but we need to understand more. And so right now we have very good preliminary data that look promising, but I think it's really important to continue to ask questions so that consumers understand what to expect and what they're willing to accept.
Indeed. Researchers then testing 52 vaccines in clinical trials on humans, 87 in pre-clinical trial. The Brazil health regulator Anvisa's announced a resumption of trials for China's Sinovac COVID-19 vaccine there. That had been delayed. Now it's back on. Jennifer, back to you for the next question. In the USA where you are, I'm looking at the figures. It is astonishing to see 10.5 million people infected. The death rate is 246,000 plus. I mean, clearly something needs to be done and needs to be done quickly. But how important is it that people are brought on at the same time with this one, that they are kept informed, that they know what they're doing, they know what will happen?
One of the most important things we're going to be seeing in the coming months is whether we can establish two-way communication. So not just a process of government agencies or pharmaceutical companies telling people what they should do, but also listening to concerns and answering questions honestly, directly. We're going to need to see religious leaders, community leaders. We're going to need to see citizen groups participating in those discussions to assure the public that this is a fully vetted, safe, and effective vaccine. And the challenge is, of course, that as you've seen in the US, this vaccine process has become unnecessarily politicized, and that's increased suspicion. So what we've seen over the last 6 months is decreasing acceptance of a possible vaccine. And that's without having any information about how hard it will be to get, how far one will have to travel, what it will look like to get a second dose 28 days later, and how you'll track which vaccine to get the second dose of, and what the side effects will look like. And we need that information to make good decisions for our families. Because it's such a serious disease and we're seeing such high mortality in the US and worldwide, people may be willing to accept a little bit more risk or discomfort or inconvenience because it feels to be really important. And that's really important to keep in mind. When people make decisions for themselves and their families, they are evaluating risk and benefit and deciding if it's worth it to them. We are all making these decisions every day, and having good information will make it possible to make better decisions that we can all feel really good about.
Let's go to Dr. Munir in the UK. The UK, of course, 23,000 new cases over the past 24 hours and 595 people sadly losing their lives. We heard there some of the concerns that Jennifer Reich was explaining from her perspective. I'm sure that you share those concerns too. This politicization of the vaccine, Dr. Munir, for people in your role, a scientist, someone who's concerned with developing these things and helping people, how annoying is it for you when you hear, and I'm sure you've heard it in the UK too, political parties trying to make a little political headway over this issue?
Yes, absolutely. I think this has been ongoing since the start of this pandemic, and it's certainly annoying because this is such a serious issue. And I think rather politicizing it or giving it an angle that is more onto the personal favor, I think better would be we will stick to the point and really start to bring in all stakeholders to really tackle this issue. And I think to some extent, its efforts have been pretty serious. But there have been moments when it was completely ridiculous, not only on the political side, but also even in this industry itself. I mean, just putting into the perspective, since we were talking about the vaccine, I mean, since the Pfizer data, although it is relatively on a small number, has been revealed, many of the pharmaceutical, they started making their announcements onto that when they will be releasing the data. For example, Sputnik 5 been announced as 92% effective, which really, ring the alarm. And I feel a bit sad really looking onto that, whether this is just the pressure from the Pfizer or this is really the genuine output from pharmaceuticals even.
Indeed. So it's a question, you would say, of making sure that all the tests are done, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is no any compromise onto this aspect, regardless. I mean, just to highlight is that most of these front-runner vaccines that include AstraZeneca, Oxford vaccine, Moderna, Pfizer's, they started phase 3 trial almost at the same time. It just so happened that in the Pfizer vaccine, 94 people got infected earlier than other trials. So just by chance, by luck, or the high infection rate at that moment. So that doesn't mean that there is a pressure for other companies. They certainly need to follow the SOPs they've been set it up. And they don't really need to, for example, for the Pfizer, they don't really need to release the data until the whole phase 3 trial is completed, because until that data is not there, as Jennifer was mentioning, there are a lot of questions that would raise alarm for some of the people. Until we really have a conclusive data and the original data out there, it will be very hard to make a very concrete judgment for the efficacy of the vaccine.
Dr. Munir, can you put a timescale on it? When do you think that people will be getting the vaccine they need?
Well, that's, again, a very difficult question. But the thing that need to be done is that 192 people need to be infected. No, sorry, 164 people need to be infected in the, for example, Pfizer trial before the phase 3 trial is concluded. So until that number is not reached, I wouldn't really trust onto the 90% efficacy, because that is determined on a very small number. Looking on to the number of people that have been recruited in each of the phase 3 late stage trial, like AstraZeneca, Moderna, and so on. So those are really expecting that the result will be announced at the end of this year, which I've been saying before as well. So what we are really looking at, realistic date is December, when we will have a conclusive data to have the regulatory body have their independent opinion. And then basically the thing that we need to look on to is the first quarter of 2021, where we will have a conclusive data from any of these vaccines.
Okay, that's a scientific assessment of it then. First quarter 2021. Politically, we're seeing in newspapers everywhere they're talking about December, but often politicians say what they wish for rather than what they know can actually happen. Let's go to Germany to Nick Spicer, our correspondent there in Berlin, on his balcony in the cold. Nick, thank you for being with us, sir. We appreciate your time and sacrifice. Great to see you. But let's talk about the figures in Germany now. I mean, it's 11,174 new cases. 116 new deaths. This is the harsh reality that we're dealing with. And I'm wondering, given how Germany's been, I think it's fair to say, relatively successful in how it's handled COVID-19, is there any sense from where you are that this kind of information campaign that Jennifer Reich was talking about, letting people know what's happening, preparing people for what comes next, is that underway in Germany, or is it still really a case of wait and see?
I think the leadership of Angela Merkel, who is a physicist by training right from the beginning of the crisis, has really helped people understand, at least those who are willing to listen. She said right at the beginning, my fellow Germans, up to 70% of you may become infected. This is how pandemics work, which really opened people's eyes and got them thinking twice about going out without a mask when that became the rule. Which isn't to say that there weren't periods of laxism over the summer. The terraces and patios were full of people because the death toll and the infection rate were quite low, and people thought, well, it seems to be going away in the way humans behave. We all behave that way to a certain extent. But then she would come back again and make a solemn address, first time since the Second World War, talking to the nation, saying we need to do this and that. So I think her leadership has really helped people pay attention to the science. The fact that she is a scientist, and it isn't quoting the scientists or bringing them in, but although they do bring in scientists with the health minister to news conferences to talk about how things are evolving, that's really helped people, I think, keep their minds focused. And she has said she would like to have people be able to celebrate Christmas. The past month saw cases double they were only 2,000 a day to 4,000, then they got up to 10,000, 11,000, you're saying, and they were saying the situation was getting out of control, to use her words, and that the app that the German government had developed that people could have on their phone was overwhelmed. So things were looking quite bad to a certain extent. And then we got news of this vaccine, incredible good news. And so I think the question is, once again, about human nature. Will people think, oh, well, the vaccine's around the corner, we may get it as early as December. Does that mean I still have to wear my mask? I have no answer to that. And I think that is probably the big concern of the government, is that people will feel, well, they'll probably be able to let things, let their guard down to a certain extent because the end is in sight. And as you and I know, and our guests know, that's not the case. You can get infected tomorrow if you're not careful.
Indeed, infected, in some cases reinfected. Nick in Berlin, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Colorado, Denver, Colorado, where Jennifer Reich is waiting for us. Professor of Sociology at the University of Denver there. Jennifer, thanks for being with us again. Just to sort of give people some statistics. And of course, some US states are as big as European countries. Colorado is not that big or not that populated, 5 million population, 139,000 cases, 2,427 people have lost their lives so far. These statistics, when you think about them, are overwhelming. The amount of people who've lost their lives, it is a tragedy, an absolute tragedy. You can pin the blame on whoever you like, but now we're looking at trying to find a way forward and stop this. People need it. Have you seen where you are that people have been worn down by what's happening? People talk about their mental health being affected, the effect it's having on whole communities.
Right. So as you've highlighted, the U.S. continues to reach new lows in terms of our ability to respond coherently to a public health crisis. And what we see is that we have a lack of infrastructure nationwide, and Colorado is in the bottom of the country for per capita testing. So we don't have a great infrastructure for people to get quick responses to possible symptoms or to concerns of exposure so they can make informed decisions to separate. What's going to be really important moving forward is that a vaccine, even if we get one that is safe and effective, will not be a magic bullet. It will not solve this overnight. No matter when it's distributed, that's not the same as having immunity, particularly in a 2-dose series. Nobody knows how long the immunity from a vaccine will even last. So while it's reportedly about 90% effective so far, we don't know how long that immunity stays in place. We don't know if this is an annual vaccine. We don't know if how many months it will last or how many years it might last. And so no matter what, a vaccine has to be one part of a broader strategy. And Americans are struggling with that. They're struggling with an economy that doesn't support small businesses when they're closed. We're struggling with mask wearing. We're struggling with conversations about making sacrifices for others because it's been beleaguering. It's been 9 months of children not going to school. We have really struggled with how much individuals can sacrifice. And one of the challenges with this disease in particular is that while it has a very high fatality rate, it's not a high fatality rate for everybody. And so what's really challenging is that for some people, it doesn't feel concerning because they imagine that they'll be lucky. They'll imagine they'll be the ones with few symptoms or that they'll recover quickly. And we don't have yet a good understanding of who develops what we call long COVID, who has permanent permanent challenges in their respiratory and vascular systems. We just don't have enough information to really understand. And so each person is trying to make their own best guess of what they believe and hope is true to justify the decisions they feel they need to make. And that's a really hard place to move forward coherently as a nation, or even as a state or a city.
Indeed. My own other half, she suffering from long COVID too. I hear exactly what you're saying. It is one of these things where there are so many questions and at present so few answers. Jennifer Wright, thank you very much for joining us there from Denver, Colorado. Thanks to Nick in Berlin. Thanks to Dr. Mohamed Munir joining us from Lancaster. And thanks to Pauline Londex joining us in part one. We will keep you up to date with all developments, of course, on the issue of the COVID-19 vaccine. For more news, do stay with us. You're watching Fast 24.